Hello everyone, welcome back to the VHS Tapes series. I'm Mikey from the NVM. It's really nice to see some familiar names in the chat and from the forums as well. Really good to have you with us. A quick reminder for those of you who aren't members of the VHS but have been shared a link of this, you can join the VHS at the vhs.thenvm.org, and we'd happily welcome anyone into our little community of game preservation, collection and enthusiasts. Just double check everyone's muted and your camera's off. We'll have lots of opportunities to have a great Q&A discussion later on. So, you know, as we're going through, if you've got any questions or anything, get them in the thread. We've got Claire and Lex again on hand helping me moderate, sharing some interesting links with you, encouraging conversation. So I'm really looking forward to today. You know, just a reminder, the VHS Tapes is a virtual talk series hosted by the NVM on all things game preservation, collection, and exhibition. And today I'm delighted to be joined and talking through all those themes with my guest, Foteini Aravani, curator of the digital collections at the Museum of London, leading on the museum's collections of video games as well. Foteini, thank you again so much for joining me. How are you?
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really well. I'm so sorry. I have to apologize in advance. I took the executive decision of attending this talk in my garden, just, you know, to absorb some sunshine. So if there are any weird sounds at some point, like lawnmowers or whatever, I will try to mute myself.
You know, it's been so long that we've all been stuck inside. I think hearing birdsong is quite alien to us all. So I think we really appreciate it, actually. I mean, I'm going to start on a semi-down note with a question. You know, how has the impact of the last 12 months been with the Museum of London, and how have you managed and dealt with that?
I mean, it was a very strange, and is still one. It's a very strange time. The Museum of London decided very soon after the first national lockdown to embark on a rapid response collecting project called Collecting COVID. So we felt that it was, you know, a moment in history that needed to be documented, not only on a global level, but on how that affected our lives in London, Londoners' experiences, and how the city also changed during the pandemic. So we've been quite busy collecting with a building closed, which was very challenging in terms of like getting objects in, or all these other processes that are, you know, designed to be in an office where you have, you know, your infrastructure around you. Digital collections were very much enhanced through this Collecting COVID project. And at the same time, we're still working on the new Museum of London at West Smithfield. We're planning to move there in 2024. So all the curatorial and museological research is still going ahead to have the building prepared for 2024.
That's wonderful that you're able to still plan towards an expansion into the other site. Have you got any preliminary sort of findings in your sort of collecting COVID? Has there been any themes or any themes that have come through so far?
Collecting COVID gave us an opportunity to, first of all, you know, enhance the collection with new acquisitions, especially through community engagement, because what we wanted to do is to reflect the variety of experiences that, you know, Londoners had during the pandemic. But at the same time, it gave us an opportunity to test some new collecting areas that we didn't have the opportunity to test before. So really expand on digital collecting was one of them. So we experimented a lot with collecting social media. So that was an area that we had started a few years ago, but we always knew that we should develop further. And because of the stay-at-home guidelines, that was like the perfect opportunity to capture Londoners' experiences through their communication through social media. So yes, it was challenging, but it did give us some room to test and experiment with new collecting areas.
I think that's fascinating. And I think it would be remiss of me on behalf of the NVM not to bring in our Animal Crossing Diaries project, which is a sort of similar project of looking at how the pandemic was played through Animal Crossing, or how the pandemic affected people's experiences of this game. And it would definitely be remiss of me to mention that the open call for that is still available for a final couple of days, I think.
Yeah.
But you know, with all the downsides of the pandemic, it is a very, I don't want to use the term fascinating because it's obviously this this national tragedy, a global tragedy, but it is a certain moment in time that if we don't capture it now, we will probably lose, especially in the social media aspect, a lot of the material that people create during the time.
I think it was, you know, as you said, I don't want to say great opportunity, but it was a great opportunity to test our rapid response collecting processes that, you know, we've done in the past, but not in such a big scale. And what I thought that, you know, gave something extra to this collecting was a lot of emotions and feelings. So museums are, you know, very good at, you know, selecting objects that sometimes are unrelatable to our personal stories, to our personal feelings. So now, since, you know, there is an event, let's call it that, that is affecting everyone, like every single person is affected by this pandemic, it was, you know, a great opportunity to add these feelings and these emotions that, you know, were going up and down, you know, during this past year, and create some more personal and relatable narratives in our collections.
That's such a brilliant topic. I'm looking forward to seeing how that evolves over time. Let's get into your involvement in curations and museums. Like, how did you get started, and what's your story with being a curator?
Ooh, so my background is collections. So that was like my first degree. I loved collections, and I loved how you can organize and research and get amazing stories out of collections, different sort of collections. So my background was in library, archive, and museum studies, and I have to admit that I started my career being attracted more to libraries and archives. I think libraries, they were provided this like order that I was always like fascinated about, how you can order knowledge. And archives, what I loved about them is that maybe sometimes they don't even give you the historical fact, the historical truth, like the way I see them. They're kind of like eavesdropping on history. So you get through archives, mainly interpretations and stories around events that are probably documented better through, you know, an object in a museum collection. But archives give you these, you know, extra layers of personal narratives that they, you know, embrace the actual event. So I came to museums a little bit later on. I was always fascinated about intangible heritage. I was fascinated about content and artifacts that they are created in a born digital way. So they have this, you know, veil of, you know, intangibility around them. So I started working as a curator at the National Museum of Contemporary Arts in Greece. I'm from Greece originally, and I was drawn to like these very early collections of video art, the classics of video art, and then, you know, moving on to like net art and these kind of like earlier forms of digital contemporary art. And then I moved here and I started working with very historical collections. So I was working at the British Library for some years on the World War I collection for the centenary of the Great War. And I soon realized that museum collections are, are more down, my alley. So I ended up working at the Museum of London, leading on the born digital collections, basically, of the museum.
And was that work based on that notion of an intangible history as well? Because I find that really, really interesting, actually. Not heard that term before, and I think that's a really good way of describing digital media. I think that's fantastic. Was that where you wanted to take the collections at the Museum of London?
Yeah, I think so. So the Museum of London is basically a museum of social history. So we're looking, at history through people's lives and, through people's eyes and through people's experiences. And one of the core collections in the museum is a collection of oral histories, which is, intangible, what you would call, traditionally intangible heritage. So I was very interested in how we could make better use, or how we could collect more and better people's stories of what it means to be a Londoner or to live in London in the 20th and 21st century. So when I started working in museums, there was, after, I guess, the explosion of all these massive digitization projects in, the beginning of 2000, where, everyone was getting, millions and millions of money to just, digitize everything and put them out there. And I remember that I was always in two minds about it. I was like, yeah, that's great, but how are you doing it and why are you doing it? So instead of ending up with millions of objects, with no information or no, intention of, putting them out there, I was always feeling a little bit strange. It felt like, a factory process where we would just, create digital content just, to put it out there. But then I realized what I was mostly interested in is, since, digital and technology has been embedded so much in our everyday life, how the museum object has started being redefined. So museums are, very old, established institutions. They work really well with old stuff. So we know very well how to acquire or accession or conserve like a Roman vase or, something like that. But I felt that it was, like a milestone that started challenging curators about what is a museum object. So I'm really interested in this stretching of the definition of a museum object, and a little bit, I'm, a big advocate of slowly starting breaking this silo between a digital object and a physical object, because in the end of the day, they're just objects, that they're telling stories. And this is what we're interested in and we should be collecting. If it was created, if it was made out of wood, or if it was created, using, whatever software, I don't think it should really matter. What it matters is, the essence and, the juice and the stories that come out of an object.
So where did that collection and that that perspective, what was the object that started, or the object, that started that collection for?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think it was the video games collection at the Museum of London. So when I first joined in 2015, I felt that I needed, to have a strong, start at the Museum of London. So I was trying to find this new collecting area that would sit under the digital collections, but it would be very close to, the mission and, the narratives that we want to tell. And also it wouldn't be so strange. It wouldn't be as strange as collecting tweets, for example. So an easier, a smoother like way into like opening up what an object should be. So video games, having a physicality as an object, but at the same time having, like the born digital element that is basically, the essence of the video game. I think it was a good way in for to kind of like follow and respect the old processes of getting in objects that are tangible. So, you would have a video game in a box or a cartridge or, whatever, but the actual, existence of the video game was, a digital file, basically.
Mm-hmm. So the collection was telling the story of London, or also games made by Londoners?
Yeah, so basically the kind of like, the main, let's say, collecting criteria were two. So video games that were created by Londoners to celebrate their contribution in the video gaming industry. And we did follow a historical approach. So when I started this research, I really wanted to find like the first video game that was ever created by a Londoner and the first video game that ever depicted London. So, it's worth mentioning it's an ongoing collection. We haven't, a complete, collection at the moment. But our approach was definitely historical. So it starts, I think the earliest video game is from 1982, which doesn't sound so old, but in the video gaming world, it is really old. And at the moment, it goes up to 2006. 2014, if I'm not wrong. So video games that were created by Londoners, video games that depict London, and as a museum of social history, celebrating Londoners' contributions, it felt only right to celebrate them through this collection as well. But also as, a curator, I'm very interested in these virtual depictions or very often misdepictions of London in video games. So how they represent the city or they misrepresent the city in their stories.
Let's dig into some of these examples because I'm fascinated by this misrepresentation. I think for the banner for the event we have Hampstead as our cover. So is there an interesting story behind how that represents London?
No, Hampstead. I think it's probably my favorite video game in the collection. If I'm not wrong, I think it was created in 1984, and it's a text-based adventure. So this is like fascinating, in its own right. But what I love about this video game is that it literally represents the socio-political context of the time. It was, during the hardcore, Thatcher years in the UK. So it is a statement to these, social conditions, but at the same time through a very special and discreet London humor. So the goal of this video game is basically, have a house in Hampstead. So you start from like a council estate, and then, you have to like basically climb up the social ladder, get nice clothes, get a nice car, marry, the right woman, and then end up, owning, a mansion in Hampstead. So even if it's not, it's not, an adventure that, you would have to kill, the monster or, save the princess. It gives you such a great insight in, a slice of London's history, but through, playing a video game, basically.
Yeah, I can see that because it's like it basically conforms to sort of popular narratives of what we consider to be the high 80s now. like yuppie culture, money, the finance sector, you know, owning property. They all see that game seems to really embody those arguments totally. Are there any misrepresentations of London? What are the examples in the collection where a game really has a warped representation of the city?
Yeah, I mean, first, like the oldest video game that we have in the collection is called Streets of London. It was made in 1982, I think, for Commodore 64. And it's again a text-based adventure where you literally navigate the streets of London. And also it uses, like, you know, this, Monty Python sense of humor, even, you know, extracts from, like, you know, little, sketches, which, is fascinating on the one hand, but on the other hand, it does make me wonder who is the audience for this video game. So if you didn't know Monty Python's, if you've never been in London before, because, you know, you have no images, no graphics, nothing, you know, to show you London, you kind of know. You need to know, you know, London in order to, you know, to navigate by, you know, punching go north, go south, and then, you know, walking in streets, you know, that probably you don't even know the names. So I don't think this is a misrepresentation, but I do find it, you know, fascinating as creating, you know, a virtual space that is, where London is the background, but I don't really know. Still to this day, I don't know who can navigate, this city just, you know, by punching commands. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of video games that are set in London that were created by American developers sometimes kind of like force the grid of Manhattan on London. So I think it's in GTA where you literally, you know, they try to respect like, the curves of Thames, but at the same time, everything is like, you know, squared, like, you know, you feel that you're in Manhattan. So when you look at it, you know, from a distance, you know, you have some misrepresentations, like, I don't know, like Camden being next to Mayfair or something like that, because this is how, you know, they could fit in, you know, the squares of the grid in there.
I was going to say, is there a roundabout in sight in GTA, or is it just that square grid system? Yeah. How is that? I think, yeah, maybe it touched on the point, sort of how the 3D space of London changes over time with difference in technology. You know, you go from your text-based adventures where, you know, you use your imagination really to picture the streets and stuff. But then as we, you know, get more sophisticated, quote unquote, 3D technology, these spaces become imagined and you can sort of walk through them really. Is there any sort of interesting ways in which that changes over the years?
Yeah, I think like the most accurate representations of the city started appearing with I think it was with the PlayStation or a little bit before that. So for example, like two, you know, games that popped in my head that, you know, they show like a very accurate London is The Getaway, which was out in 2000, if I'm not wrong, and Tomb Raider 3, The Adventures of Lara Croft, that was out in 1998, if I'm not wrong. So in The Adventures of Lara Croft, you know, probably it's not, you know, the most, you know, accurate, amazing 3D representation, but you do get to see, you know, very close to accurate, landmarks, for example, of London. So there is like this amazing scene, you know, on the rooftop of St. Paul's Cathedral, or by, you know, by Thames, like, and you do get the feeling of, you know, this is London. But what I do love about Tomb Raider 3, I mean, I love many things, but in terms of London, what I do love about Tomb Raider 3 is that it not only gives you access to locations in London that we, as, you know, people living in the city, we don't have in real life. So I don't know if you remember, there is a brilliant scene that takes place in Aldwych Tube Station, which is a disused tube station that I think, if I'm not wrong, it opens once a year for like open house, and it's, you know, tube station that it's used for, I think it's used by police for like anti-terrorist, you know, exercises, or, you know, for filming and stuff like that. But through, by playing the video game, you get to see, you know, how, a secret or, you know, hidden part of London looks like in, you know, virtual life, that you don't have access, you know, to real life. And for example, like talking about St. Paul's, like, as you know, visitors to St. Paul's, like we've never been like on top of the rooftop, or we haven't seen, you know, St. Paul's from like such a great height. Probably if you have been up, you know, the Shard from the viewing platform, but it gives you views and perspectives of the city and of iconic landmarks that you don't normally have in real life.
I was going to say, what extent are these later games are sort of greatest hits of London? So, like, you know, it condenses the geography of the city so that St. Paul's is, you know, behind Parliament, or that the London Eye is next to the Shard, and Canary Wharf is just a quick walk away rather than down the river.
Mm.
Is that, do you see that a lot? And then also, I guess, is there any sort of relationship to how the imagery of London in a digital game is seen in sort of popular film? Because there's sometimes a lot of conjecture between how we have popular representations of history through film. I wonder if the same thing could be said of digital games of London.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said, you know, probably applies more to movies, and, you know, we've all experienced that. But, you know, with the video games, I think that, you know, mostly they focus on, you know, representing these big landmarks and the iconic landmarks, like things that, you know, you will see and you say, oh yeah, that's London. Oh, that's the London Eye. That's, you know, Big Ben or something like that. But I don't think they bother too much about, you know, the rest of the city. I mean, I'm sure, you know, the general, you know, feeling of being in London is being, you know, conveyed through the video games. But I think it's, you know, the landmarks, what's, you know, they focus on to make it like more accurate.
Oh, have you seen any of the recent, I want to say Assassin's Creed, it's not Assassin's Creed, is it? Watch Dogs, and that was based in London.
Yeah. I think, you know, I don't know it very well. I've seen, you know, like, you know, trailers and, you know, stuff like that, and I think it looks great, to be honest.
Yeah, I've not played it. I've only seen sort of video clips or anything, but I feel like that sophistication of the technology as well means that this more, maybe not complete, but maybe a broader representation of like geographically where things are in London is definitely possible. Let's get away from sort of images of London. Let's talk about sort of provenance. I love talking about provenance, but you know, what have been, because I can imagine.
Before we move on to provenance, like I do like video games that, you know, I don't feel that video games about London should provide a very, very, you know, accurate representation of the city. And I am very interested in these very, you know, reimaginations of the city through video games, especially through, you know, recent, what would my, you know, someone say, you know, between video game and art installations. So we have in our collection for video games by artist Lawrence Leck, who all of them, they take place in London, but in this, you know, reimagined London. And by reimagining the city, it does provide, it does some criticism to how the city has being developed and expanded, especially after the London Olympics. So I don't, you know, I'm not only interested in, you know, the amazing, you know, representation of, you know, the city through, you know, amazing technology and all these big, you know, video games like, you know, Watch Dogs, Legions and stuff like that. But I'm interested in, you know, these more ambient and, you know, poetic, you know, landscape that the city can provide in order to tell, you know, a story by playing that video game.
I absolutely agree with you on that. I think the abstraction of the city is often more interesting than just doing a like for like comparison. Let's talk about provenance. So how difficult was it to track down authors, developers of these games? Especially, I can imagine some of these games in the collection are quite obscure. So that must have been a difficulty.
It was very challenging, definitely. I don't think I knew from the beginning how difficult it was going to be in terms of, you know, how copyright can get, you know, very complicated, especially in all video games, in terms of like how many people will have copyright on, you know, a specific video game. So, especially for the video games that were, you know, developed and published in the 80s and in the beginning of 90s. I mean, we had to face, you know, companies or publishers that were defunct, that, you know, they probably, you know, published one video game and then they like totally disappeared from the surface of the earth. So you had to like, if we were lucky, that company would have been bought up by another, and in the end, you know, we would trace who would own that company now. But sometimes, you know, I remember it was like with 4 or 5, like that actually small company ended up being owned by Virgin Media or BT. So we would call like the legal team of like Virgin Media and would be, oh, we think that you're the copyright owners of Werewolves in London. And they would hang up like immediately because there was, you know, no documentation from like that time. Contracts also were like very, you know, loose at that time. Probably, you know, developers would get, you know, a couple of hundreds of pounds and then, you know, they wouldn't have any rights on that. So it was very difficult to trace the, and a lot of like developers at the time, they were probably, you know, 16-year-olds in the 80s, in their pajamas, you know, programming video games. And now, you know, they're like a lot older and they have like, you know, different careers. So we would have to like to find, you know, what they're doing at the moment. We did launch an open call at some point, basically, you know, inviting developers from the 80s and the 90s that were active in London, you know, to get in touch and, you know, to start the conversation about, you know, acquiring video games that they had developed. And after many months, I can't even remember how long it took, but it did take a very long time. We managed to track down a lot of the developers or the publishers or anyway, the copyright owners. And we could proceed with the acquisition. I think it was in only 1 or 2, I can't remember, I think it was 1 in the end, that we couldn't trace the copyright owner, like nothing, no information. And we acquired the video game as an orphan work and, you know, under our, you know, takedown policy, or, you know, whatever, it could be like, you know, reopened if someone comes forward, you know, in the future.
Is that orphaned work policy an innovation of the Museum of London, or is that a wider museum policy? Really?
No, it's from the EU copyright law. It's you know, the orphan work, you know, directive. I don't know how it's called. You know, there is a specific process where, you know, while you do your due diligence to you know, to trace the copyright holder, there are like, I can't remember, like 2 or 3 or 4, 5 probably steps that you need to take, and, you know, also document, you know, these steps so you can prove it in the future. And you would then, you know, constitute a work as orphan.
Were there any games in the collection when you were trying to find the authors that then by say the open call, was there any like additional documentation that you were able to collect about the game based on the fact that you had this open call, you had the game, and then they have like their own archive that they were able to share with you?
Excellent question, Mikey. Because this is like generally like not only me, but I think it's like a wider, not policy, like intention, let's say, between curators at the museum is to acquire as much contextual information about the object as I can. Again, being, a museum of social history, our objects are not, well, they're never, shiny, incredibly valuable or, made out of like diamonds, with exceptions, obviously. But, the majority of our collections are everyday objects with not, real, value in terms of like monetary value. But, the value of the objects are in the people that created them, or in the people that used them, or, when and why they were used. So when we would be able to get in touch with the developer, we would try to collect, as much as we could around it. So like storyboards or drawings or, promotional material of the time, articles in like, magazines of the times, sometimes oral histories to get, the story of how, this specific developer started, developing video games, because that was, what I found more interesting in the actual, when we started like shaping the collection. So we would get basically not only, the video game as an object, but, all the back story before this video game was made, basically.
That's brilliant. So with all this different type of text and information, how do you go about exhibiting that?
Another great question, Mike. So we haven't done a big video game exhibition at the Museum of London. We've only done a display back, I think, in 2015 or 2016. And then we have sprinkled some video games within, a wider, exhibition. So in 2015, which was a very small display about, these new acquisitions, we displayed like, in cases, the actual, physical objects that we had. So, like the video game, the boxes, posters, the actual, consoles. I can't remember what else, but anything that was like, physical, tangible, that would go behind, a case. We also exhibited an oral history by Ian Livingstone, who was talking about, who's giving the backstory of Lara Croft, basically. So how come Lara Croft, became Lara Croft, and, all that, which was like very London and very interesting, because there were like, some, facts that were not very well known. For example, Lara Croft is a Londoner, so she should fit in, very well in that. And then we had 4 or 5 playable video games, old video games that we had emulated, and we recreated them in a way that the look and feel of the actual console would be authentic to the original console that they were, developed for. But the actual game was running from, it was a digital file that was running from an emulator. But, like the keyboard, for example, or, the graphic card would be, an old one to give you, the look and feel of that video game. So that was that. We have displayed video games as just a video, as the video game walkthrough of the specific game, and that was because it was in a big exhibition that we didn't have budget to present them in their playable way. That was like with a 3D headset you were supposed to play it, so we couldn't afford that, and also we didn't have resources in terms of like the hosts to help visitors put on the headset, clean the headset, manage the queues and stuff like that. And then we have, I think for me, the most anyway, like the best way that the Museum of London has displayed video games was kind of like as an art installation, I would say. So 3 video games by Lawrence Legg in a room were projected as the video game walkthrough. So if someone didn't want to play or engage with the video games, they could just, watch the video, and directly opposite them it was the playable version on a screen where you would have your controls, and then there was a seat, so you would play what you would watch behind you basically. And for me that was like let's say the most inclusive way of displaying video games, especially at the Museum of London, that our audiences well, the average of our audience are, a lot older and a lot more traditional. So we didn't want, to force them or exclude them from an experience. So they could passively watch something, and if they were intrigued, they could actively play the same thing in the same room.
That's really fascinating, because I was going to ask you actually a sort of follow-up about your position on having something in a museum that's playable rather than, just a passive sort of display where there's video, because consuming video games are all, that you can play them, but I can go on YouTube now and watch a video or go on my phone. So was having that playability crucial, or was it just a sort of an additional plus that the exhibition and the displays could have done that?
I think like from a curatorial point of view, it was crucial because that specific object was originally created as a video game. So if we wanted to be authentic to the object, and the intention of the object was to display it as it was created. But I mean, we have to take into consideration like a lot of practical limitations when we display video games in a history museum, which is budget, money, the resilience or the maintenance of all these consoles and the hardware and stuff like that. So like for example, for the new museum, like it would be amazing if in one of the permanent galleries, one of the objects in the permanent galleries was a video game. But if we're being pragmatic, every time we have displayed video games as a playable option, we've always had many problems. Like they break quite often, they crash quite often. Like there had to be someone like literally there, like restarting them. So this is something that is not sustainable for us. So we need to find ways to to display them. So in the way that they were created for, but in a way that would make our lives easier as well.
I think the moral of the story there is a lack of funding is the greatest enemy of all museum activity.
I mean, always, I would never say no to any extra money, ever. But I think that the hardware that comes, with all these like new video games, they're, created for home use. They're not created for a video game to be played by thousands of visitors and, school groups that they go mental when they go in a gallery and they see that, they can play a video game. So I think that, for home use, everything works like perfectly well. But every time we have tried to put like, like a headset or, or a console, after a while, they all break immediately.
Yeah. Can't. It's a difficult problem. And I think it's one of those things that is also potentially with copyright issues as well, of being able to play these games in this exhibition setting is quite, there's sort of minefields about emulation and copyright that are difficult to navigate as well. But yeah, you can't trust hardware anymore. So another rule. I can't believe this, but we've already been talking for about 3/4 of an hour.
Oh, wow.
Which, time has absolutely escaped us. And so again, it would be remiss of me not to open the floor to,
Yeah.
I'm sure, lots of questions that we have.
I'm sorry, first of all, I want to thank everyone. I'm just going through the chat with all these amazing suggestions for like video games set in London. Like some of them I do know, some of them I don't know. But thank you so much for taking the time to, you know, to type these suggestions in the chat. Oops.
So it already looks like we have a few questions in the chat. So got question from Now Play This. How do you marry the physical and digital presentation in exhibiting works?
Sorry, how do I?
How do you marry the physical and digital presentation in exhibiting works?
I mean, I think, you know, the way you probably imagine, so there were like cases to put like physical objects in the cases. Then there were screens that we displayed the, you know, walkthroughs of the video games. And then there were, you know, headphones for the oral histories. And then there were the, you know, the recreated old new consoles for the playable video game. So like, nothing that, you know, you probably haven't seen before. So basically, you know, screens, were there any projections? No. So I think it was screens, cases, and computers, basically.
I've got a question from Stephen Goodwin. Do you have a map of game developers based in London?
I don't have, like, I think that I mean, we haven't created one, but when, you know, after the open call, were a lot video gamers, you know, video game developers like got in touch, we started like logging them. And then I think that I need to get back to you because I can't remember where I found it. I did find something similar from one of these, you know, video game representative bodies that showed, you know, video game, was it like TIGA or like something like that, or it was through London Games Festival, I think. Yeah, so we based our research, you know, on that. Now that I thought of London Games Festival, we have produced a video game store of the Museum of London, which is now live and you can go and book. So we have commissioned Sasha Coward, who has selected 5 or 6 objects, I think, that are on display. And then he has mapped them with video games that the objects feature in. So it's really good. So if you want, it's still live, you can go and book it.
I think we were talking about this just before the call started. So I think we've put that in the chat for everyone to look at. Another question from Luke Earl. What is the percentage of physical to digital media in the gaming collection?
Okay, so in terms of like their digital preservation, we tried to extract all the like, even if they came in like, you know, cartridges or tapes or, you know, whatever, we tried to extract like the digital file of the video game and, you know, save it, you know, on the server where basically we save, you know, the digital collection. So in terms of, you know, what is the object is like the physical thing that is in the store and, you know, with everything surrounding it, like, you know, the console or the, you know, booklets or, you know, however it came. So that's in the store. But, you know, the access copy is the actual, you know, digital file that was extracted from the tapes, which is the one that we use for our research or when we, you know, display it.
That's great. A question from Abigail Chapman. Have you found that there are any special considerations for cataloguing video games?
That's a great question, actually. Yeah, that's a great question. So far, we have been using the guidelines, let's say, that we use for every other object in the collection. And of course, like some information, stays out if you want from the, predefined fields of these, object records. And we end up, documenting a lot in the, the notes field, which is not, the greatest place to keep information. But lately, there are a couple of 2 or 3 initiatives, like UK wide initiatives, in terms of they deal with complex digital objects. They deal with video games in terms of like collecting them and preserving them. So I think that we're in a good moment, and I think very soon these working groups will come up with some sort of like guidelines or a best practice to document and catalog video games. But at the moment we just follow the the guidelines of all the objects in the collection.
And hopefully talks like this, which have been fantastic, are a step towards that cataloguing process as well. Fingers crossed. Question from Holly Robertson. Are emulators inevitable for the preservation of video games? What do you think about developers opposing emulators, and how does that limit the way in which games can be preserved?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes, like, well, first of all, I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. Sometimes, you just need to do something in order to, like, future-proof it and maintain it, for future generations. Like emulators is what we have used so far. And we do try to emulate ethically. So, ask the developer's permission to emulate it and do it ourselves, and not use, an emulated version that is, online somewhere. I think that sometimes, I don't know, probably they do actually, but I don't know how much they limit the authenticity of the video game. But I think at the moment, because the real issue is the obsolescence of these video games, and we need to come up with ways to preserve them as much as we can. Probably sometimes we might go down a route that is not 1,000% perfect, but even if it's like 99% perfect, that's better than nothing. Sorry, I don't know if I answer your question, but
well, I think you make a really good point that the work that you're doing, the work that loads of other museums are doing with digital games, is really new, and we're still trying to find the ways in which we can do this stuff sustainably for a long term. A question from Barry: will the exhibit include London gamers through time, such as the early amusement arcades, accessibility work at the National Physical Laboratory, and some supporting schools supporting disabled children, and so on?
I mean, Barry, that would be great, wouldn't it? But again, like, trying to be very pragmatic and realistic. Like, the video games collection is a small fragment of the Museum of London collection. You can imagine that other collections have like a priority in terms of their historical value, or what the audiences want as well. It's worth mentioning, I don't know if I'm allowed to share that, but I will anyway. So we're doing a consultation round with Londoners. We call it the New Museum Community, where basically we share very often objects that we are planning or we are thinking of putting on display in the new museum. And then the audience, I think there are like 400 people in these consultation groups, and they give us their feedback. A couple of weeks ago I shared Lara Croft, we don't say a lot of things. We say, you know, we have like a picture of Lara Croft and we're like, what do you think? Is there a London connection with this object? Would you like to see it, you know, in the new museum in any way? Like, you know, a playable version, you know, the movie, you know, something like that. I have to admit that only 30% thought that Lara Croft has, you know, a role in the new Museum of London. So there is a lot to be done in terms of like, you know, our community. And, you know, we need to listen to our audiences, like what we, you know, people on this Zoom screen think that would be amazing. Probably, you know, we represent, you know, a percentage of, you know, the wider audience. So we need to be like more mindful about, you know, what we think is interesting and, you know, proceed.
That's really interesting that in sort of a cultural trends sort of perspective, how Lara's position in sort of popular culture is changing. A comment from Luca: Lara is a Derby girl.
Well, she was born in Wimbledon, though.
We might have some fierce debate here. I love that we've got exclusive coverage as well with the VHS, which is what we like to hear.
Derby girl because the developers were there, but Lara Croft is a born and raised Londoner, so we're talking about the fictional character.
I don't know if I should let this play out anymore. This could get nasty.
Whoa!
And then, if there's any more questions, feel free. We've still got a couple of minutes left, but you know, I'm conscious that it's also absolutely beautiful in the,
yes.
especially the UK at the moment. Yeah, as Foteini's proving with that beautiful background. I think we'll leave it to a close there. Thank you all so much for your questions, everyone.
Thank you for your suggestions and your questions and for everything. And, you know, Mikey and, you know, BGI for inviting me. It was a pleasure being here. Thank
you so much for your time. I'm hopeful that in a short while we'll all be able to safely visit the museum soon. You know, it's serendipitous that it's very sunny on one of the first days that we're allowed to see more people. So, you know, this is hopefully a turning point. So the recording will be made available online. Also, all the comments and stuff in the chat will be made available too with the video publicly. So Foteini, you'll be able to consult that at your leisure. Very helpful comments in there from the audience. So thank you very much. I want to thank Claire and Lex again for making this possible. I'm just the puppet that makes this, that just talks. Thank you all for attending. Remember, if you want to join the VHS, it's the vhs.thenvm.org, little application button at the bottom. We don't have any impending news of the next VHS tapes because we're going to have a nice Easter break, and then we're going to surprise you all with our next talk. So hopefully everyone have a lovely holiday, enjoy the spring, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you.